Now I want you to imagine this. A young man on a mission to defy the laws of nature, claiming he's on the very brink of unlocking the secrets of time travel. Some call him a genius. Others call him a lunatic. But what happens when his experiments blur the line between ambition and madness? Well, in the mid-1990s, Michael Madman Marcum set out to build a machine that would rewrite history, or erase him from it altogether. And what he created would baffle scientists, it would terrify skeptics, and ultimately unleash an unthinkable fate. Here's the strangest part. We may have already found Michael, but the catch? We found him decades before he vanished. What's going on, Midnight Mafia? Grab your popcorn for this one, because in this one things get quite dicey. Now make sure to comment what your favorite part of this story is, and whether or not you liked it, loved it, or somewhat nonchalantly thought it was absolutely mid. But I hope you at least liked it. You know what I mean? Liked it? Okay, so as of now, it's time to slip into a crazy mind that's not our own. Let's go. It started on a warm, humid evening in 1995 on a worn-out porch in Stranberry, Missouri. The sun was at that point dipping low behind the fields, and it was kind of painting the sky in these shades of orange and purple. And there he was, 21-year-old Michael Marcum, and he sat in this old rocking chair on his porch, and its wood would creak whenever he shifted his weight back and forth. Now, as he was looking out, we shall look at him through an outsider, because they saw a restless college student. But if they looked a little closer, they would have noticed something burning behind his eyes. A drive to discover what others had deemed at that point, and still today, impossible. Now, while most people knew of what a Jacob's Ladder was, as kind of a science fair project or spooky decoration, Michael saw his homemade version as a key to another world. When the two poles and the bright arcs of electricity snapped and hissed between the two metal rods, it was more than just a party trick to him. It was a doorway to whatever lay beyond normal physics. It's kind of incredible how just this one thing inspired him to do this. So, on one night, he attached a simple CD laser to both of the arcs. And he noticed at that point that the beams weren't just leaping in straight lines anymore. They formed this brief kind of swirl, kind of like a tiny vortex. So Michael was curious at this point, and he picked up a small metal screw and then tossed it into the crackling energy. And then, in an instant, the screw disappeared. But then it reappeared a few feet away. It felt scorching hot and looked bent when he touched it, as though if it had been through something terrible. But instead of being frightened, that wasn't like Michael. Michael's heart raced with excitement, and he believed that he had just got a glimpse of the first real proof of time travel, or at least teleportation. But small tests at this point were not enough for Michael. He wanted a device big enough to send larger objects, even people, through it. But all of his experiments at this point drained a huge amount of electricity, as you can imagine, and this home wiring that he had just wasn't going to cut it. That's when he turned his gaze towards St. Joseph's Light and Power. And early in 1995, Michael then crept into the company's power station in King City, Missouri, and he walked off with 6 industrial transformers. I mean, just think of somebody with 6 transformers loading them into a Jeep. I mean, you gotta imagine each one was very expensive and massive, but to him they were perfect parts of his next big leap. But unfortunately for Michael, he was great at physics, but he wasn't a master thief. So his ramped up experiments caused power outages all over the neighborhood, which immediately attracted attention. So police just had to follow the trail of blinking lights right to Michael's doorstep. And in less than a week, they found him. They confiscated all the stolen transformers and they locked him up. And at the time, he was given 60 days of jail and then probation. But during his time behind bars, instead of, seeing his arrest as the end of it, he saw it just as a small, tiny little setback. And he used those long hours of doing nothing alone just to dream about how he would improve this machine once he was free. So after 60 days went by and Michael was released, Michael's story swept onto the airwaves of Coast to Coast AM, the famous late night radio show that was hosted by Art Bell. If you guys have never heard the show, I highly, highly request that you do, because it's known for featuring everything from alien encounters to secret government projects. And the show was the perfect stage for a determined young man claiming to have glimpsed time travel. And when he was on the show and he spoke, listeners practically felt the sparks. He described how he had powered his device with the stolen transformers and how he had tossed a metal screw into a rip of reality and how it came out all twisted. His calm voice hinted at both scientific focus and the undercurrent of some obsession. And some listeners thought that he was a genius. Others dismissed him as crazy, but everybody at least paid attention when he was talking. So Michael announced that he was going to start it back up again. This time though, with donated money and supplies pouring in from all of these curious fans that heard him on the Art Bell show. And by 1996, he insisted that he'd sent more than 200 test subjects through this new portal. Possibly even small animals, he said. But he did claim that whenever he put something through, each time they did return. And they seemed changed in very strange ways, like they had been gone for more than just a second. However, he hadn't tried to put himself in it yet. But he was getting closer to that final step. So we're gonna fast forward to January. Michael made his final radio appearance on Art Bell for another interview, stating he was only about a month away from building a human-sized time machine. And when it was fully built and erected, he planned to walk himself right into the vortex, holding nothing but his cell phone. And if he landed in the wrong place or time, that phone that he had in his hand would be his lifeline. And it worked. And on the program, when Bell asked if he feared death, Michael brushed that question aside in this kind of weird, tense laugh. A thrill of possibly being the first time traveler blinded him to every other risk. And then, soon after that interview, just about a month later, Michael vanished. He didn't answer any calls, and his house was empty. The lab that once housed his swirling arcs of electricity was abandoned. Bits of cable and twisted metal scattered like a cryptic puzzle just waiting to be solved. It was as if one day he was preparing to break every law of nature, and the next day he was gone without a trace. And that's when local police found his laboratory empty, equipment still warm to the touch. Papers were covered in these complex equations that were actually scattered everywhere throughout. And in the center of the room stood a large metal contraption, silent but somehow menacing. Now this is when it gets good, because at this point, now years have passed by, and his story just became another, late night legend, until an amateur historian made a chilling discovery while researching these old newspapers. And it happened to be in 1932, yes, 1932, a described body that had been washed ashore inside a damaged metal tube. Now, the coroners noted these bizarre details of the case, that the man's body showed signs of exposure to extreme electrical energy. And most importantly, clutched inside of his hand was an unidentifiable device that looked like a miniature radio. Now, this coincidence was impossible to ignore. Michael had promised to take his cell phone with him, a device that would have seemed like alien technology to someone in 1932, and the body was never identified, and the strange radio disappeared from the evidence locker years ago. And here here's where the story takes its darkest turn. If that body really was Michael Marcum, then his time machine didn't just work, it worked too well. Instead of stepping into humanity's future, he crashed into humanity's past, ending up in an era that couldn't possibly understand what had happened to him. And remember, for those people of you that have vast knowledge on time travel, people like Einstein and other brilliant minds today say that time travel could be possible, but only to the future, they say. They say going to the past for some reason would be impossible. So if this story is true, then wow, it's even more crazy than you think. And some say the evidence is just too strong to ignore. The timeline fits, the mysterious device matches, even the electrical burns align with what you would expect from his experiments. Others, though, insist that all of this is just an elaborate coincidence, or maybe even a hoax. But consider this, what if somewhere in the vast ocean of time, a young man's twisted metal tube is still spinning through decades after, carrying its ambitious passenger to places that are unknown? Maybe Michael Marcum didn't fail at all. Maybe he succeeded way too well and paid the ultimate price for daring to break the laws of physics. Well, at the end, one thing is certain. The next time you hear strange electrical humming coming from your neighbor's garage late at night, you might want to go out there and check if anything around you seems out of time. Now, if you waited to the end, good for you, because like I said, this has a twist. And I know I might have already said it has a twist, but yes, there is another one. Because everything that I just said is what you exactly would have thought up into 2015. That's what the whole community thought up into 2015. But what happened in 2015 would prove that the 1932 thing was totally wrong. And here's why. Somehow in 2015, Art Bell got Michael on his show again. And at this point, his show was called Midnight in the Desert. And that's where Michael Marcum came on and interviewed and said that he had been transported 2 years and 800 miles away into the future. Believe it or not, I like this story because where he says he landed in Fairfield, Ohio, is merely a half an hour away from where I live. But now the tricky thing is, was he playing this all along? Because on Art Bell's show, he said after that, he claimed he had amnesia from everything that happened in between. He only remembered a few things. But then it was known while living in a homeless shelter that Michael started slowly to remember things like his name and his social security number. And finally, other memories came to him that enabled him to enter back into society. But I will say one thing. The Missouri State Highway Patrol had no record of him ever being missing. Well, at least as a missing person. So take that as you may, but either way, it's still an incredible story. And the thing that really gets me also is that 1932 is such a weird year because another time traveler claims that he went to 1932 and then to the future. Well, I guess you're gonna have to tune in for next week to figure that one out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please hit that like button. And also, if you want to see an incredible story with one of the most twisted endings that you will not expect, you need to click this story. I'm telling you, click this story right here. Now, I also, for the people that made it this late, might be uploading twice a week. Let me know in the comments if you want that. Cheers.